I thought I knew my family. Hell, I thought I knew the entire neighborhood. It was the summer of 2023, and I'd finally retired after years of hard work. The house, the garden, the little things that made it all feel like home. I had built this life, and now I was going to enjoy it. That's what I believed, anyway. But then, one afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and saw Linda holding a letter in her hands. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. The letter was from the HOA, the Homeowners Association. At first glance, it didn't make sense. I mean, these HOA rules were dry, boring stuff. No one ever paid much attention unless it was about landscaping or parking. But this one was different. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. I skimmed through it, frowning. The rule was about property lines, and of course, noise restrictions. Nothing new there, or so I thought. But as I read, my stomach tightened. The language was vague, yet oddly specific, too. It felt like it was aimed directly at me, at my house, at everything I had worked for. I turned to Linda, who had been staring at the paper in silence. "What is this?" I asked. "It doesn't even make sense. I don't get it." She hesitated, her eyes avoiding mine, and that hesitation, it spoke volumes. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like glass. "I think it sets Richard Emerson. It sets Richard, my son-in-law. The man who had married my daughter 20 years ago. The quiet one. The one who I always thought would never make waves. Especially not in the family." I couldn't believe it. I let out a laugh, trying to break the tension. "Richard? Why would he do this? What does he have against me?" But Linda didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Instead, she slowly folded the paper, placing it on the table, and looked me in the eye. "He's the president of the HOA now. He's been pushing for changes, and I think this rule is aimed directly at you." I felt the blood drain from my face. Richard, the guy who I'd treated like a son, had used his position to target me. But why? What had I done to deserve this? Linda swallowed hard, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Emerson, Sepp's always hated the way you Sepp criticized him. The way you Sepp been so hard on him over the years. He resented you for it, and now he Sepp's in power. He Sepp's using that power against you." It was a punch to the gut. The realization hit me like a freight train. I had always been a father, trying to guide, to challenge, to protect my family. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I had no idea how deep Richard's resentment ran. I stood there, frozen, staring at the letter. The rule wasn't just some innocent misunderstanding. It was calculated, personal. The very thing I had worked so hard to build, my home, my retirement, my peace, was under threat. This wasn't about property lines. This wasn't about some stupid noise restriction. This was a betrayal. As I read the rule again, the weight of its impact sank in. The wording was vague enough that it could be used to target anyone, but detailed enough to specifically affect me. It was a direct shot. He knew my weaknesses, my habits. He'd carefully tailored this rule, crafting it just for me. I couldn't breathe. I needed answers. I needed to confront him. But Linda, still looking down at the table, spoke again, this time with a heavy sadness in her voice. "I didn't set one to tell you, Emerson. But Set's been after you for a while now. I didn't know how to stop it." The walls felt like they were closing in. The man I'd trusted, the man who'd married my daughter and shared our family dinners, had turned on me. Richard had used the very system I'd trusted to control my life, to destroy it. I couldn't sit back and let it happen. Not like this. I looked at Linda, my eyes hard. We scepter not letting him get away with this. I him not losing my home because of some petty grudge. My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. How long had this been in the works? How deep did Richard's influence run within the HOA? I had always known that power, unchecked, could corrupt. But this was a betrayal that went beyond what I ever expected from my family. I grabbed the paper and marched into my study, where I had a small safe, one I used for important documents. I didn't trust anything else. As I put the rule inside, I looked around the room, suddenly questioning everything I'd built. My home, my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I was determined to fight. Richard may have thought he had the upper hand, but he didn't know who he was dealing with. I'd been meticulous all my life, keeping records, watching for any signs of trouble. It was time to put those skills to use. I had to protect my home, my family, and most of all, myself. This wasn't just about some petty rule, it was about justice. And I was going to make sure Richard learned that no one, not even family, could betray me without facing the consequences. The shock of it all hit me like a ton of bricks. But that was just the beginning. The real weight came later, when I realized how deep Richard's betrayal went. It wasn't just about the rule, it was about the family I thought I knew. The life I'd worked so hard to build, all of it was at risk. And for what? A petty grudge? Power? I couldn't understand it, and worse, I couldn't let it go. The days that followed were the hardest I'd ever faced. I tried to keep it together. I had to for Linda's sake, for the sake of our family. But every time I looked at her, I saw the hesitation in her eyes. The guilt, she knew. She knew what Richard had been up to, and she hadn't told me. I couldn't help but feel betrayed by her too, even though I understood why she'd kept quiet. She didn't want to destroy the family, but by keeping silent, she was letting it happen. It was on a Friday evening when I cracked. We were sitting at the kitchen table, Linda stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. I wasn't eating. I hadn't eaten much since the discovery. My appetite was gone, replaced by a gnawing pit in my stomach. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think straight. "What am I supposed to do, Linda?" I asked, my voice hoarse though I didn't want it to be. I spent my whole life building this house, this family, and now Richard thinks he can just take it from me, because he sets pissed off about something I said 5 years ago. Linda looked at me, her eyes filled with regret. "I don't set no Emerson. I never thought it would go this far. I thought he set stop after a while, but I should have warned you. I should foot said something earlier." Her words, though laced with guilt, didn't make it any easier. The damage was done. Richard had crossed the line, and no matter how many times Linda apologized, it wouldn't change the fact that I was now fighting for everything I'd worked for. The next few weeks were a blur of court filings, lawyer consultations, and late-night arguments. It was like living in a fog. The fear of losing my home, my savings, and the future I had planned for myself was overwhelming. And the worst part? The hardest part? The emotional toll it was taking on Linda and me. Every time I tried to talk to her, it felt like we were two strangers trying to have a conversation. The bond that had once been unbreakable was now strained, the weight of Richard's betrayal hanging between us like a dark cloud. I found myself at the edge of a breakdown. I would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, unable to sleep, unable to stop thinking about how this could destroy everything. How could I have been so blind? How could I not see what Richard was doing? One evening, I found myself sitting on the porch, staring into the dark. The sound of crickets and distant cars was the only thing that filled the silence. I hadn't realized how alone I felt until that moment. Linda had gone to bed, and for the first time I felt the full weight of the battle ahead. It wasn't just about Richard anymore. It wasn't even just about the HOA. It was about my family, my dignity, my life. I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let this be the thing that broke me, but I wasn't sure if I had the strength to fight anymore. That's when I overheard something that changed everything. It was just a quiet conversation at first, a neighbor speaking to another neighbor across the street. I didn't mean to listen, but their words cut through the air like a knife. "Did you hear what Richard Tepp's doing to Emerson? It's Sepp's a damn shame. I always knew he was a snake. But this is next level." The other neighbor, an older man named Frank, nodded gravely. "Yeah, and I said not the only one who Sepp's noticed. Sepp's been pulling strings with the HOA for months. Sepp's not just Emerson. Sepp's been skimming money from the HOA funds too." My heart skipped a beat. Frank knew. He knew about Richard's manipulation. That was all I needed to hear. It wasn't just me. Richard had been using his position for months, maybe longer, to line his own pockets and target anyone who stood in his way. That was when the fight in me reignited. I wasn't going to take this lying down. I couldn't. This wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about exposing Richard for who he really was, about showing the world the kind of man he had become. I got up from the porch, determination flooding through me. I knew what I had to do. I had to start fighting back. I had to gather evidence, build a case, and expose everything. But I wasn't going to do it alone. I needed allies. I needed people who had seen Richard's manipulation firsthand and were willing to speak out. I knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy. I knew it would tear my family apart, and maybe it would cost me more than I was willing to give. But I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try. And that's how it began. The fight for my home, my family, my justice, the fight to take back what was mine. The moment I heard Frank's words, everything changed. The fog lifted, and for the first time in weeks, I could see a clear path forward. I wasn't going to sit by and let Richard manipulate me any longer. I had to fight back. But this wouldn't be some rash, emotional outburst. No, this would be calculated, methodical, a game of chess, and I was about to make my first move. The first step? Gathering evidence. I spent the next few days combing through every document I could find. I dug up old HOA meeting notes, correspondence, any piece of paper that could expose Richard's manipulation. I wasn't just looking for a smoking gun. I was looking for the trail, the web he'd spun to get his way. I spent hours at the kitchen table, the papers strewn around me like some kind of war room. Linda didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She knew what I was doing. She didn't know if it would work, but she knew it was the only option left. Every so often she'd pass by, offering me a sympathetic look. But there was something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe? Or was it fear? I couldn't tell anymore. Either way, I had no time to deal with that now. I had bigger fish to fry. One afternoon, I was going through the HOA's financial statements when something caught my eye. A large sum of money had been misappropriated. It was labeled as a maintenance fee, but when I cross-referenced it with the records of work done in the community, there was no matching invoice, no contractor listed. I had no idea how much Richard had been pocketing, but this was it. This was the leverage I needed. I copied the document and made sure to keep a copy for myself. I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. If Richard had been stealing from the HOA, from everyone, it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the entire community. He had to be exposed. Next, I reached out to my lawyer, David. He had been handling my legal affairs for years, though he wasn't the first name that came to mind when I thought of high-powered attorneys. He was a bit on the older side, had seen his share of failed cases. But there was one thing about him I respected. He wasn't afraid to fight dirty when it mattered. If anyone could help me get through this, it was him. David was skeptical at first when I explained the situation. "You're telling me your own son-in-law is pulling the strings in the HOA and using his power to go after you?" he asked. Disbelief in his voice. "That's a hell of a claim, Emerson. You're gonna need more than just a letter and a few misfiled receipts." I told him about the financial discrepancies, the harassment complaints, everything I had uncovered, and I wasn't just looking for a legal defense. I was looking for a way to bring this to the public, to make Richard's dirty secrets impossible to ignore. David finally agreed to take the case, but he wasn't going to rush into anything. This had to be planned carefully. One misstep, and Richard would turn it around on us. "Let's take it slow," David said. "We need to build a solid case first. No rushing, no half measures. We need proof and not just circumstantial stuff. We need to be able to hit him where it hurts." I agreed. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. It was going to take time, but every step I took made me more resolute. I had a purpose again. Richard had made a mistake by underestimating me, and I was going to make sure he regretted it. As I continued gathering evidence, I reached out to a few neighbors who had been vocal about Richard's shady practices. There was Frank, of course, who'd already spilled the beans about Richard's influence in the HOA. But there were others too. Kathy from 2 doors down had been on the HOA board before Richard took over. She had seen it all. I called her one night, nervous but determined. "I sense not getting involved in any of this, Emerson," Kathy said, her voice shaky. "But I sense. Tell you this, Richard Sem's been pushing things his way for months now. I seen it. It's Sem's not just you. Sem's been manipulating everyone." I thanked her and told her I understood. I wasn't asking her to make waves, not yet. But I made it clear that once I had enough evidence, I would need her to testify. She didn't respond, but I could hear the resignation in her voice. She was scared, but I couldn't worry about that right now. She wasn't the only one who was scared. I had to push forward. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. It wasn't just the financial mismanagement. Richard had been bullying other homeowners, strong-arming them into supporting his rule. There were emails, texts, even a recording from a board meeting where Richard had blatantly manipulated a vote to get his way. It was the smoking gun I needed, and it felt damn good to have it. I knew I had to be careful. If Richard suspected I was gathering evidence, he would stop at nothing to destroy me. But at the same time, every new piece of information I found fueled the fire inside me. This wasn't just about my house. This was about making sure Richard could never harm anyone again. By the time I had collected all the documents, recordings, and testimonies, I felt like a different person. I wasn't the same man who had stumbled across that rule a few weeks ago, shocked and unsure. No. I was a man on a mission now, and I would make Richard pay for what he had done. I met with David again, and we laid out the plan. This time to hit him where it hurts. David said, his voice low, "We's sister going public with this. He's sister going to have to answer for what he's sist's done." I knew this wouldn't be easy. I knew it would tear my family apart. But there was no turning back now. The plan was in motion. It was time. I had spent weeks preparing, meticulously gathering every piece of evidence, every document, every conversation that could bring Richard's manipulation into the light. I'd reached out to the right people, secured testimony from those who had seen his underhanded tactics firsthand. Now it was time to strike. But I wasn't going to rush this. This wasn't a moment for a quick emotional outburst. No, this was about methodical revenge. Every step had to be calculated, deliberate, like a master chess player setting up the perfect checkmate. The first move was obvious. I had to file a formal complaint with the HOA board. I couldn't just sit back and let Richard's power slide. He had used his position to attack me, and now it was my turn. I took everything I had, the financial mismanagement, the false votes, the harassment complaints from my neighbors, and I laid it all out. I didn't just submit a complaint, I made sure it was airtight. I remember the day I handed the complaint to the HOA's office. My hands were steady, but inside my heart was pounding. This was it, the first step toward taking Richard down. But as I walked out of the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. I wasn't naive. I knew Richard wasn't going to let this go quietly. Later that day, I received a call from David, my lawyer. His voice was calm, but I could tell he was ready for the storm that was coming. "Emerson, I just heard from a couple of the board members. Richard's already trying to spin this. He's going to fight back, and he's got a lot of influence. But don't worry, we're ready. We'll take this to the public if we have to. But we need to keep the pressure on." I couldn't let up now. I knew Richard was going to use every trick in the book to turn this around, to make me look like the villain. I had to stay one step ahead. The next move was even more important. I needed to take this public. The HOA wasn't going to investigate Richard without some serious pressure. I started working with a local reporter, someone I'd known for years. Her name was Sarah, and she had always been a no-nonsense journalist who didn't mind taking on powerful people when they got too comfortable. I had her meet me at a coffee shop a few days after I filed the complaint.
"Are you sure about this, Emerson?"
she asked, as we sat in a quiet corner, sipping our coffee. Going public could make things even messier. Richard has connections, and he's Sip's going to fight dirty. It won't set just be a legal battle. It's set be a public one. People will take sides. I nodded, my jaw clenched. I'd been through enough in the past few weeks to know that Richard wasn't going to back down. If I didn't do this, I'd lose everything. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I've already lost my peace of mind. My family is falling apart. I can't let him get away with this. If the public knows what he's done, there's no way he can win. Sarah listened carefully, nodding. She understood what was at stake. "All right, I'll write the story, but we have to make sure the evidence is solid. You can just throw accusations around without proof. This has to be airtight." We spent the next few hours going over everything. The misappropriated funds, the fabricated votes, the personal harassment. Sarah knew how to make the story compelling without overselling it. She would frame it as a public interest piece about corruption in homeowners associations, using Richard as the example of what happens when power is abused. By the end of our meeting, I had a plan. Sarah would write the article, and once it was published, we'd start applying pressure on the HOA to take action. Richard wouldn't be able to hide behind his power anymore. But of course, Richard wasn't going to let me get away with it that easily. That night, I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You don't want to go down this road, Emerson." It was a thinly veiled threat, one I was sure came straight from Richard's camp. Inside the message, it was clear Richard was prepared to use every bit of leverage he had to discredit me, to make me look like the one who was in the wrong. He wasn't going to just let this go. He was going to fight, and he was going to fight dirty. The email was a warning, but I didn't flinch. It only strengthened my resolve. I wasn't scared of him. I wasn't scared of his power. And I wasn't going to back down. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Sarah worked tirelessly on the article, and I continued gathering any additional evidence I could find. Every time I found something new, I felt a rush of adrenaline. Each new piece of information was like a weapon, and I was ready to use them all. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Richard wasn't just some petty HOA president. He was a man who had used his position for personal gain, who had manipulated his family, his friends, and his community for his own selfish interests. And I was going to expose him for who he really was. The tension between Linda and me grew, of course. She could feel the weight of what was happening. I knew she didn't want this. She didn't want to tear her family apart. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let Richard destroy everything I had built. The day the article went live, I felt a mixture of relief and dread. The headline read, "Local HOA President Accused of Manipulating Rules for Personal Gain. Residents Speak Out." It was out there, the story of Richard's manipulation, his corruption, and his betrayal. The comments started flooding in. Some were supportive, others skeptical, but the damage was done. The public was finally aware of what Richard had been doing. There was no turning back now. The days after Sarah's article hit the press were a blur of tension and anticipation. I could feel the walls closing in on Richard. The public had started to pick up on the story, and the media attention was exactly what I needed to push the HOA to act. But I wasn't deluding myself. This wasn't a victory yet, this was just the beginning. Richard was the kind of man who would use every ounce of his power to stop this from getting out of hand. I knew he would come for me. I was just waiting for the first shot. David, my lawyer, was on edge. "This is it, Emerson," he said over the phone. "This is where the real fight starts. Richard is going to try and shut us down, discredit the evidence, discredit the story. We need to be ready for what comes next." I wasn't about to let him win. The truth was on my side, and it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down on Richard. But first, I needed to be sure the case was airtight. There could be no loopholes, no way for him to wiggle free. The more I dug, the more I realized how much I had underestimated just how deep this went. David had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, filing motions, gathering expert witnesses, and prepping for the next steps. He was a fighter, but he wasn't some young hotshot looking for glory. He was a seasoned attorney who'd seen it all, and that's why I trusted him. He knew how to go to war without leaving a trail behind. "We've got everything in place," David told me one morning. "We've got the financial records, the emails, the testimonies, and now we've got the final piece of the puzzle. Richard Seth's secret recording." My stomach dropped. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The recording wasn't something I had gotten easily. It had taken months of careful planning, a few close calls, and a lot of trust. But it was everything I needed to bring Richard down. A former HOA board member, a man named Victor, had been a reluctant witness to some of Richard's most unethical dealings. Victor had agreed to secretly record a conversation with Richard, where he explicitly admitted to using his position to alter the HOA rules for personal gain. It was damning, and it was exactly the kind of evidence that would crush Richard's defense once and for all. I still remember the day David called me to tell me the recording was ready. "It seems all there," David said, his voice low, careful. Richard Semm's own words, the admission of guilt. It's Semm's undeniable. We set up a meeting the next morning. David played the recording for me, and I could feel my blood boiling as Richard's voice crackled through the speakers. If we don't make the changes, we're going to lose everything, Richard said, the words dripping with self-interest. We need to make sure Emerson is out of the picture. That house is worth too much to let it slip away. My hands clenched into fists. This was it. This was the smoking gun. The very man who had tried to destroy me was now exposed for the world to see. The recording was so clear, so damning, that I knew it would end Richard's career, his reign as HOA president, and his ability to manipulate anyone ever again. The only problem? Richard wasn't backing down. Not yet. He was too smart to go down without a fight. The moment I thought I had the upper hand, he retaliated. His first move was to try and discredit the story further, calling it a smear campaign, claiming it was all just a misunderstanding. He reached out to the local press, giving them his version of events. He painted me as the one who had been making things up, as if I were the problem, as if I had been the one to instigate the chaos. David wasn't surprised. Don't let it throw you off course, he advised. It sets the same tactic every time. Richard knows he sets on the ropes. He sets trying to control the narrative, but the facts are in your favor. Stick to the plan. I wasn't about to back down now. I had the truth on my side. I had the proof. It was just a matter of making sure everyone knew it. The next step was crucial. We needed to go public with the recording. I worked with David to draft a formal statement, something that would leave no room for doubt. It wasn't just about the recording. It was about the whole story. The manipulation, the lies, the way Richard had used his power to destroy not just my life, but the lives of others in our community. I still remember the moment I released the statement. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat at my desk, staring at the email before I hit send. This wasn't just a case. This was the moment that would change everything. I could feel the weight of it on my shoulders. But I wasn't scared. I was ready. As the press picked up the story, Richard's world began to unravel. The HOA board members who had once turned a blind eye to his actions now found themselves facing public scrutiny. The pressure mounted, and soon other homeowners came forward, some speaking out in support of me, others confirming their own suspicions about Richard's tactics. People had finally started to see the truth. But just when I thought the tide was turning in my favor, Richard made his last desperate move. He contacted a high-powered lawyer, someone who could help him fight back, someone who knew how to drag a case through the mud and make it as painful as possible. It was a warning. The fight was far from over. But I had a choice to make. I could retreat and let him win, or I could push forward and make sure this ended once and for all. There was no going back now. The fight had officially escalated. Richard had called in reinforcements, hiring a high-priced lawyer with a reputation for dragging cases through the courts until they were nothing but mangled messes. The man's name was David Hargrove, and he was known for one thing, making people wish they never crossed paths with him. The moment I heard his name, I knew this was going to get ugly. David, my lawyer, called me that evening. His voice was calm, but I could hear the unease under it. Emerson Hargrove's not a guy you want to deal with. He's a shark. He'll throw everything he can at us, and he won't stop until we're drained dry. But we've got the evidence. We've got the truth. He nibbled there. I knew what he meant. It wasn't just about the money, though that was a part of it. This was a battle for something far bigger. My dignity, my home, my family. Hargrove could try to twist the narrative, but the truth was already out there, and I wasn't backing down. But still, the pressure was mounting. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach every time I looked at Linda. She was worried, her eyes clouded with concern, but also guilt. I saw it every day. The strain of what was happening, the distance between us growing by the hour. She knew this was tearing me apart, but I also knew she didn't want to lose her family, her daughter's husband in the process. Every day that passed brought us closer to the inevitable showdown. Richard wasn't sitting back and waiting. He was working with Hargrove, pushing hard to paint me as the aggressor, the one who had caused all the problems. His camp had started releasing counter-statements, claiming I was exaggerating everything, trying to manipulate the situation to my favor. They were trying to portray me as an old man who couldn't let go of the past, someone who'd twisted facts to fit his narrative. But they didn't have the facts on their side. They didn't have the recordings, the financial documents, the testimonies from neighbors who were now lining up to speak out against Richard. And I wasn't going to let him rewrite the story. Still, it wasn't easy. The more Hargrove pushed, the more I could see cracks forming. I wasn't just battling Richard now. I was battling the system he had manipulated, the people who were afraid of crossing him, the fear that had been embedded in this community for years. Richard had created a web of influence, and pulling it apart was going to take more than just evidence. It was going to take resolve. One evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, I went out to the porch again. The air was thick with tension, and I needed a moment to think. As I sat there, I couldn't help but replay everything that had happened in my mind. The discovery of the rule, Linda's reluctance to speak up, the financial mismanagement, the betrayal. It felt like it had all happened so quickly. Yet here I was, weeks into a battle I never thought I'd be fighting. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to shake off the exhaustion. I was physically drained, mentally spent, but I couldn't stop. Not now. If I did, Richard would win. He would walk away unscathed, and everything I had fought for, my home, my family's peace, the truth, would be for nothing. That sets when I heard the footsteps. Linda came out to join me, her expression a mixture of sadness and concern. Emerson, I know how hard this is for you, she said, her voice soft. I don't set know what to say anymore. I can set change what foots happened, and I set 'em scared. I set 'em scared of losing you, losing us. I knew she was scared. I was scared too, but what were we supposed to do? Let Richard walk all over us? Let him destroy everything I had built because of his ego and greed? No, I couldn't let it happen. I know you for scared, I said quietly, looking her in the eye. I'm scared too. But if I back down now, everything I Sep worked for, everything we Sep built, it's Sep's gone. It's Sep, not going to let him take this from me. Not from us. Linda nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. But what if it tears us apart in the end, Emerson? What if we lose everything? We Sempi already lost part of it, I replied, my voice steady. But if we don't fight, we lose all of it. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it tightly. I'm not going to let Richard win, not like this. I don't sit care what it costs me. I'm going to make sure he pays for what he seps. She didn't respond, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to believe me, she wanted to support me. But she was torn between her loyalty to me and her loyalty to her daughter, her family. The tension between us had reached a breaking point. Every conversation, every glance, felt like we were walking on eggshells. But as the days passed, the urgency of the situation became more and more apparent. We couldn't afford to wait anymore. Richard was cornered, and he knew it. The media had turned against him. The HOA board members were starting to question his authority, and the public pressure was building. But he wasn't giving up without a fight. The war wasn't over. It was just getting started. David called me again the next day. Emerson, the judge is pushing for a settlement. But I don't trust Richard. I think he's just trying to buy time. We can let him manipulate the system. We need to push harder now. I nodded, my mind already made up. We don't settle, not this time. I not backing down. The courtroom was looming closer, and I could feel the weight of it in every moment. The final showdown was coming, and everything, my family, my future, my home, was riding on what happened next. But I wasn't about to let Richard get away with it. Not when the truth was finally on my side. The day had arrived. The courtroom doors loomed in front of me like a battleground, and I felt the weight of it all in my chest. Everything, the months of evidence gathering, the sleepless nights, the arguments with Linda, the relentless pressure had led to this moment. I was ready. I had no choice but to be. But the truth was, even though I was prepared for this battle, I didn't know how it would end. Richard had been playing his game as expected. He'd called in his big guns, his high-powered lawyer David Hargrove, to spin the narrative in his favor. The courtroom had been buzzing for weeks, full of whispers and rumors. Every time I thought I had the upper hand, Richard would find a way to twist things around, to manipulate the situation just enough to keep me on the defensive. But I wasn't about to let him control this anymore. David and I had spent hours the night before going over our strategy. He had the recording, the financial discrepancies, the testimonies from neighbors, and the hard evidence that Richard had been stealing from the HOA and using his position for personal gain. There was no way Richard could escape this. The facts were on my side. But even with all that, I knew I couldn't take my foot off the gas. Richard was desperate now. He wasn't going down without a fight, and if there was one thing I had learned, it was that men like Richard don't lose gracefully. The tension in the courtroom was thick when the judge finally called the session to order. Richard was sitting on the other side, looking like a man who had already lost, but his eyes were calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Hargrove stood next to him, calm and composed, ready to defend Richard no matter the cost. On my side, David was just as poised, but there was an underlying fire in his eyes, a drive I hadn't seen before. "We shall begin," the judge announced, his voice cutting through the silence. "Mr. Emerson, you may present your case." I stood, my legs slightly shaky, but my mind clear. This was it. I wasn't just defending myself anymore, I was defending my family, my future, my life. I looked directly at Richard, and for a moment I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. He knew the tide was turning. The truth was about to be exposed. David and I had planned the opening carefully. The strategy was simple. Start with the recording. Let the words of Richard himself destroy his defense. The courtroom was quiet as David stood and played the recording through the speakers. Richard's voice filled the room, clear as day. "We need to make sure Emerson is out of the picture. That house is worth too much to let it slip away." A hushed gasp spread through the courtroom. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me, but I kept my composure. I wasn't going to let Richard's arrogance rattle me. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to waste it. Hargrove moved quickly, trying to discredit the recording, claiming it was taken out of context, that it was just a one-off conversation that didn't mean anything. He tried to paint me as a man who was exaggerating, but the damage had already been done. The seed of doubt had been planted. People were listening. People were starting to see who Richard really was. The judge, a seasoned man who had seen it all, raised an eyebrow at Hargrove's objections. "Mr. Hargrove, you're suggesting that the defendant's own words are irrelevant?" he asked, his tone skeptical. It was a blow to Richard's defense, one that was hard to recover from. But Richard wasn't done. He had one last trick up his sleeve. He stood up, pacing in front of the bench, eyes flicking between the judge and the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard began, his voice smooth and practiced. "This is nothing more than a family dispute, a misunderstanding between a father and his son-in-law. This is a man who feels entitled to his property, entitled to control. He's using the power of the court to try and destroy me, to tear apart my family. And why? Because he can't let go." I could feel my blood boil. He was trying to turn the entire case into a personal attack, to make me look like the villain. He was doing everything he could to shift the focus away from his manipulation. But I was done being the victim. David, sensing the shift in momentum, stood and interjected, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Johnson," he said, addressing the judge, "what Mr. Richards is suggesting is that we ignore the facts, ignore the financial misconduct, and ignore the years of manipulation. But what he's leaving out, ladies and gentlemen, is the truth. The truth that Richard has been using his position to destroy this man, to manipulate a system that was supposed to protect him. We're not here to settle a family dispute. We're here to expose a corrupt system." The tension was palpable. I could see the jury members shifting in their seats, starting to lean in. They were hearing it, the truth. Richard's carefully crafted facade was starting to crack, and as David continued to lay out the evidence, one by one, the pieces of Richard's manipulation fell apart. The misappropriated funds, the false votes, the fabricated complaints, all of it exposed. And then the moment I had been waiting for arrived. A former HOA board member, Kathy, had agreed to testify. She had been a silent witness to Richard's underhanded tactics, and now she was ready to speak. She took the stand and for the first time told the truth. She spoke about the way Richard had bullied board members into agreeing with his decisions, about the way he had manipulated the votes and steered the board to his own benefit. And when she mentioned the financial discrepancies, the missing funds, Richard's face turned ashen. The room went silent. I saw Richard's grip on his composure slip, his hands trembling slightly. The pressure was building. The walls he'd built around his lies were crumbling. And that was when I saw it. The small, subtle shift in his eyes. The fear he realized he was losing control. And that fear, it was the first crack in the armor. I knew then, without a doubt, that we had won. It wasn't over yet, but the pieces were in place. Richard's empire was about to come crashing down. The days following the courtroom showdown were a blur. The verdict was still pending, but the damage had already been done. Richard's once unshakable confidence had turned into desperation, and I could feel the ripple effects of his collapse reaching far beyond the courtroom. The community had seen the truth, and there was no going back. But while Richard's empire crumbled, the fallout for me and my family had only just begun. Linda and I were standing in the kitchen one evening. The tension thick in the air, the TV was on in the background, but neither of us was really paying attention to it. I had just returned from another meeting with David. We were still waiting for the judge's final decision, but I knew it was just a matter of time. Richard was finished. His manipulation, his lies, everything he'd done was finally exposed. And yet the weight of it all hung over me like a storm cloud. Linda finally broke the silence. "Emerson, what SIP's gonna happen to us?" Her voice trembled, but there was a flicker of hope behind her words. "Is this over? Is it really going to be all right?" I looked at her. The woman I'd spent over 30 years with, she had been my rock, my partner. But even now I could see how the strain of the last few months had broken something inside her. We both had been through hell, and I wasn't sure how much more we could take. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't about Richard either. It was about us, about our family and the life we had worked for. "Linda, it set's not over yet," I said, my voice soft but steady. "I can set lie to you. This has torn us apart, but what Richard has done, it set's unforgivable. I one set let him get away with it." She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving mine. I know you one set. But I don't set know if we can survive this. If I can survive this, I set never felt so alone. Her words hit me harder than I expected. The truth was, I hadn't been present for her through this. I'd been so consumed with the fight that I hadn't noticed how much it had taken out of her, how much it had torn at the fabric of our relationship. Richard's betrayal had opened wounds I hadn't even realized existed. "I said I'm sorry," I said, my throat tight. "I said I'm so sorry, Linda. I didn't set a mean for it to come to this. But I had to fight. I had to protect our home." "I know," she whispered. "But we are losing something in this fight too, Arnemos set we. Something we can set get back." The weight of her words hung in the air, and I realized just how much we had both sacrificed. The house, the fight, the public spectacle, it had all come at a cost, and that cost was greater than I had ever anticipated. A few days later, the final ruling came in. The judge's decision was swift and firm. Richard was removed from his position as HOA president, and the HOA board was required to undergo a complete restructuring. The financial discrepancies were officially addressed, and Richard was forced to return the stolen funds, though the full extent of his manipulation was still unclear. It felt like a victory, but it wasn't the sweet win I had imagined. It wasn't the moment of triumph I had pictured in my head when I first began this fight. The reality was colder than that. Richard's downfall was only one piece of the puzzle. The damage to my family, to my relationship with Linda, was something that couldn't be easily fixed. The trust that had been broken, the emotional toll, those things didn't disappear overnight. The next few weeks were a blur of press interviews, statements to the community, and legal paperwork. Richard had tried to fight back one last time, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was done. His reputation, his career, they were destroyed. But I couldn't feel victorious. I had won, but at what cost? One evening, as I sat in the living room looking out the window at the quiet neighborhood, I realized that I had gotten what I wanted. Richard was exposed. The community knew the truth, but something inside me had shifted. The house, the home that had once represented everything I had worked for, now felt empty. I had won the battle, but I had lost something far more important: peace. Linda came into the room, her face tired but soft. She had been quiet for days, the silence between us still hanging heavy. "Emerson," she said quietly, sitting next to me. "What now? Where do we go from here?" I looked at her, the woman I had fought so hard to protect, and realized that she wasn't the only thing I had almost lost. I had nearly lost myself in this fight. In the pursuit of justice, I had forgotten the very thing I had been fighting for: my family. "I don't know, Linda," I said softly, my voice heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were, but I know we can keep living like this. We have to figure out how to heal together." She nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I just want us to be okay again. I want us to have peace." And for the first time in months, I realized that peace was the only thing worth fighting for now. The war was over, but the real challenge was just beginning: rebuilding what had been broken, finding a way forward, and holding on to the things that mattered most. The courtroom doors had slammed shut on Richard's future, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I had done everything I could to expose him, to get justice for myself, for my family, for my home. And yet, as the days passed and the dust settled, I found myself questioning whether it had all been worth it. The weight of the victory felt like a hollow echo in the back of my mind. Richard's fall from grace was swift. The press had been relentless, the public outraged by the revelations. The HOA had completely restructured, and Richard was barred from holding any future positions of power in the community. His reputation was shattered. He was left to pick up the pieces of a life that he had built on lies. But for me, it wasn't the grand moment I had imagined. It wasn't the closure I thought I'd feel when the scales of justice tipped in my favor. Instead, there was a gnawing emptiness, a constant reminder that the personal cost had been far greater than I'd anticipated. Linda and I had spent weeks trying to put the pieces of our relationship back together, but it wasn't easy. Every conversation felt like it was under a microscope. Every word measured. The tension between us was thick, the silence deafening at times. The damage that had been done during the battle with Richard lingered in the background, like a shadow that wouldn't let go. We had been through too much to pretend that everything was fine. Richard's manipulation had changed everything, not just for me, but for all of us. The constant stress, the fear of losing everything, the emotional toll it had taken on our family, it had all left its mark. And though we both wanted to heal, I knew that we were different now. That perhaps was the most difficult truth of all. One evening, Linda sat down beside me, her eyes tired but sincere. "Emerson," she said quietly, "I know you think we have lost something, and maybe we have. But I still here. We still here, and maybe that sep's enough." I looked at her, seeing the same woman I had always loved, but now she seemed like a stranger too. The person I had fought to protect had become someone I needed to rebuild with. My fight for justice had taken me away from what mattered most, and now I wasn't sure if it was too late to fix what had been broken. "Do you think we can ever go back to what we were?" I asked, my voice softer than I had expected. Linda paused, her gaze drifting to the window. "I don't know," she said after a long moment, "but I think we can build something new, together. We don't need to go back. We need to move forward." Her words settled over me like a quiet storm, and for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to feel something other than anger, frustration, and fear. I allowed myself to feel the possibility of healing, of starting over. But even as I sat there with her, I knew that the fight had come at a price. The loss of trust, the emotional distance, the cracks in our foundation, these were things that couldn't be fixed with a simple apology. There was no quick fix, no magical resolution. All I could do now was keep moving forward, one step at a time. Meanwhile, Richard's life continued to spiral downward. Without the power of the HOA behind him, without his connections, he had lost everything: His house was put up for sale, and I heard through the grapevine that his wife had left him. The man who once seemed untouchable, who had used every advantage to climb to the top, was now facing the consequences of his actions. It was a bitter victory. Seeing Richard crumble like that wasn't satisfying. It didn't make up for the damage he had done. In the end, I realized that revenge, justice, whatever you want to call it, doesn't fill the void that betrayal creates. There was no satisfaction in watching him lose everything. It didn't undo the months of stress, the sleepless nights, or the way it had torn my family apart. But it did something else. It gave me clarity. I had fought to protect my home, my family, my future. I had exposed the truth, and I had forced Richard to face the consequences of his greed. In doing that, I had reclaimed something that had been taken from me: my dignity, my sense of justice. Still, the emptiness lingered. I had won, but it wasn't the way I had envisioned. The fight had left me with more questions than answers, more scars than triumphs. And as the days went by, I couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. I spent the next few weeks in quiet reflection, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Richard's downfall had been swift and decisive, but it wasn't the closure I had hoped for. It wasn't the final chapter of a perfect story. No, the story of what had happened to my family was far more complicated than that. It was a journey of betrayal, anger, and pain, but also of resilience, strength, and the possibility of healing. Linda and I, though not whole, were beginning to rebuild. I couldn't erase the scars, but we were starting to rebuild trust, piece by piece. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. It couldn't be. But as we sat together that evening, watching the sun set over our neighborhood, I knew we were on the right path. We may not have been the same people we were before Richard's betrayal, but we were still standing, and that, in the end, was all I needed. As I sit here now, the weight of everything that's happened presses down on me. The months of tension, of fear, of fighting for what I believed was right. It all feels like a distant memory, a chapter in my life that's finally closed. Richard is gone, his power shattered, and the community is finally free from the grip of his manipulation. But even as I look back on everything I've fought for, I find myself wondering if it was all worth it. I thought this battle would bring me peace. I thought that once Richard was exposed, once he was held accountable for what he'd done, I'd feel some sense of closure. I imagined I would walk away from this stronger, more resolved, with my family whole again. But as the days pass, I realize that closure isn't as simple as I'd hoped. The scars left by betrayal, the emotional toll of the fight, don't just disappear because the battle is over. I still catch myself replaying the courtroom in my mind. The way Richard's world crumbled before him, the way his facade cracked, his confident demeanor replaced by panic. For a moment I thought it would feel good, watching him lose everything. But it didn't. It didn't bring me any satisfaction. I saw his downfall, and all I could think about was the cost, the damage to my family, to my life, to everything I had once believed in. Linda and I have started talking again, but it's different now. We're not the same people we were before all of this happened. Our relationship has been irrevocably changed by the months of tension, the secrets, the betrayals. I can feel the distance between us, even though we're both trying. We're trying to rebuild, to find a new rhythm. But I know it's not going to be easy. We can't just pick up where we left off. We have to start from scratch, learn to trust again, and that's not something that can be fixed overnight. I think about Richard sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with something closer to sorrow. He was a man consumed by ambition, by the desire to control, to hold power over others. And now he's lost it all. He's alone. No one to stand by him, no one to support him. And while I can't say I feel bad for him, I do wonder how he'll live with the consequences of his actions. Will he ever truly understand what he did? Will he ever look back on all of this and regret it? I think about how things could have gone differently. If I had just walked away, if I had never confronted him, if I had stayed quiet, would we still be a family? Would I have kept my peace, my home, my life? I'll never know. But what I do know is this: I couldn't let him win. I couldn't let him destroy me, destroy everything I had worked for. I had to fight. Not just for my home, but for my dignity, for my right to live a life free from fear and manipulation. And in the end, that's what justice really was. It wasn't about destroying Richard. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance, about standing up for myself when everything in me wanted to collapse. It was about proving that no one, not even family, has the right to take away what is yours, to manipulate and control for their own gain. Justice wasn't about winning in the courtroom, it was about reclaiming my peace. Now I'm faced with the reality of what comes next. I've won the legal battle, but the real battle is within myself. I have to rebuild not just my relationship with Linda, but with myself. I have to learn how to move forward without the constant weight of fear and anger hanging over me. I have to find peace again, not just with Richard's downfall, but with everything that happened along the way. I think about the future now, but it doesn't seem as certain as it once did. The world isn't as clear-cut as it used to be. There's no easy path forward, no guarantee that everything will fall into place. I've learned that much over these last few months. But maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what life is. A series of steps, some sure, some uncertain, but always moving forward, always learning. I look out at the backyard now, the garden that I've spent so many years tending. It's a symbol of what I've worked for, what I've fought for, and it's a symbol of what I still have. I haven't lost everything. I haven't lost my home, my family, my future. I still have the chance to rebuild, to make things right, to find the peace that I've been searching for. And maybe, just maybe, that sits enough. The weeks that followed Richard's downfall were a strange mixture of quiet and chaos. On the outside, everything seemed to settle into a new routine. The neighborhood was calmer, the HOA had been restructured, and Richard was no longer at the helm. The air felt lighter and the oppressive weight of his influence had finally lifted. But for me, the aftermath was anything but peaceful. I had won, yes. But what did that victory really mean? Richard was gone, stripped of his power and his reputation. The public knew what he had done. The legal battle had been won, the lies exposed, the manipulations unraveled. The truth had triumphed, but at what cost? I had given up so much time, peace, family. I had lost parts of myself in the process, and now I was left to rebuild. I spent most of my days alone in the house, the quiet almost deafening. The room where I used to work, the space I'd created over the years, now felt like a shell of what it once was. I found myself sitting by the window looking out at the yard, as if waiting for something to change, waiting for something to feel different. Linda and I, well, we were still trying to put the pieces of our relationship together. The emotional toll of the past months had fractured us in ways I hadn't anticipated. She had been through the emotional ringer just as much as I had, and I realized I hadn't been there for her the way I should have been. She had always been my partner, my equal, but I had let the fight with Richard consume me. Now we were both standing at the edge of something, unsure of how to bridge the gap between us. One evening after dinner we sat together on the couch in silence. Linda turned to me, her face soft, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I saw something more than worry in her eyes. There was tenderness there, a flicker of hope. "Bud's been thinking," she began, her voice quieter than usual. "Maybe it's time we take a break. A real one, away from all of this." I looked at her, unsure at first. Take a break? We had been fighting for so long, fighting for our home, for justice. We had been so focused on the external battle that I hadn't stopped to consider what Linda needed, what we needed. "You mean, leave here?" I asked, my mind still stuck on the idea of victory and moving forward. She nodded slowly, her hand finding mine on the couch. "Maybe it's time we get away from all the stress, from the memories of everything that happened. We can start fresh, just the two of us. Maybe it's time to find some peace, real peace." I swallowed hard. The thought of walking away from everything, from the house, from the fight, seemed almost impossible. But then, looking at Linda, I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't about revenge or even the victory over Richard. It was about us, about finding a way to heal, to rebuild what had been broken, and to reclaim the life we both deserved. A week later, we packed our things and left. We rented a small cabin by the lake, far away from the chaos, far away from the echoes of Richard's manipulation. It wasn't an easy decision, and it certainly wasn't the end of the road, but it was a beginning, a chance to find a new rhythm, a new pace, free from the weight of everything we had been through. The first few days were difficult. We spent our time walking around the lake, reading, cooking simple meals together. Slowly, as we talked and reflected, the distance between us started to close. There was still a lot of work to do, a lot of healing that needed to happen, but this quiet, peaceful place was exactly what we needed. For the first time in months, we both felt like we could breathe. It wasn't all smooth sailing. I still found myself thinking about the past, about Richard, about everything I had fought for. But I was learning to let go. I was learning to accept that justice had been served, but that didn't mean I had to keep holding on to the anger and the pain. Letting go of Richard's influence was the first step. The second, I realized, was letting go of the part of me that was still angry, still bitter about everything that had happened. One afternoon, as Linda and I sat by the lake, I turned to her and said, I don't set know where we go from here, but I want to make it right. I want to build something with you again. She smiled, a gentle, forgiving smile, and squeezed my hand. I set him here, Emerson. I always have been. We just need to find our way back. And slowly over time we did. It wasn't quick and it wasn't perfect, but we learned to live again, to be present, to be together. The aftermath of everything we had gone through was still there, lingering in the background, but it wasn't the center of our world anymore. We had taken the first steps toward healing, toward rebuilding what mattered most, our connection, our peace, and our future. It's strange, looking back now, how much things have changed. The quiet that settled over our lives after we left the chaos behind was something I never could have anticipated. Richard was gone, his reign of manipulation reduced to nothing but a distant memory, and I had my family back, or at least I was on the path to getting it back. But as time passed, something unexpected happened. I received a letter one day, a simple envelope with no return address. At first, I thought it was just another piece of junk mail, another reminder of the world that had tried to pull me into its grip. But when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was an invitation. The HOA, the very institution that Richard had once controlled, wanted me to join their leadership structure. I sat there staring at the letter in disbelief. It was a strange twist of fate, the kind of irony that makes you question the universe's sense of humor. After everything, after all the blood, sweat, and tears, the endless hours of fighting, the betrayal, they wanted me to become a part of the very system I had battled so fiercely against. It felt like a slap in the face. How could they possibly think I would agree to this? After all the damage Richard had caused, after everything we had been through, they wanted me to step into the very role that had once allowed his power to corrupt and destroy. For a moment I considered just throwing the letter away, ignoring it, letting it slip into the past, just like Richard. But then I realized something. The reason they were offering me this position was because they knew what I had done. They knew I had exposed Richard, and they knew I was the one who had fought for the truth. I wasn't just another member of the community anymore. I had become a symbol of what the HOA could be if it was led by someone with integrity. The thought of it gnawed at me. It was tempting, in a way. The idea of having power, the chance to make real change. But then I remembered everything I had fought for. I remembered the toll it had taken on my family, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights. I remembered how close I had come to losing everything. The last thing I wanted was to return to that kind of environment. Power was a dangerous thing, and I had already seen what it could do when it was abused. I threw the letter down on the table, my hand trembling slightly. It was hard to explain why this felt like a betrayal in its own right. Perhaps it was the simple fact that after everything Richard had done, after all the lies, the manipulation, the pain, I wasn't sure I could ever trust the system again. It wasn't just about winning the fight, it was about the cost. And now the cost felt like it was being handed back to me on a silver platter, as if I were meant to take the same role Richard had used to destroy so many lives. The irony was maddening. I sat there, staring at the letter for what felt like hours. And then, without a word, I stood up and walked outside. The air was cool against my face, and the lake in front of me seemed peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just come from. Linda was sitting on the porch, her feet up on the railing, looking out at the water. She didn't say anything when I walked up beside her, but I could tell she could sense something was wrong. I handed her the letter without a word. She glanced at it, then looked up at me, her eyes filled with curiosity. When she saw the confusion in my face, her expression softened. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded, still trying to wrap my mind around the decision that had been placed in front of me. "I don't set no, Linda. Part of me thinks it sets a joke. After everything we set been through, how could they think I sets want to join them?" She didn't respond immediately, instead taking the letter from my hands and reading it through slowly. When she was done, she handed it back to me, her eyes thoughtful. "Maybe it's not a joke, Emerson. Maybe it's just a reminder that you've won. You've changed everything, and now they want you to be the one who leads it differently. Maybe they see you as the kind of man who can fix it." I felt a sharp pang in my chest. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this was some kind of opportunity, that this was a chance for me to truly make a difference. But I couldn't ignore what had happened. I couldn't forget the toll it had taken on me, on my family. "No," I said, my voice firm. "I already fought for this. Already won. Not going back into that world." Linda smiled gently, her hand reaching out to squeeze mine. "I don't think you need to go back. Done enough." And just like that, the decision was made. The irony of the situation hit me full force. The very institution that had once tried to tear me apart was now asking me to step back into its fold. But the truth was, I didn't need it. I had already found what mattered most: my family, my peace, my future. I crumpled the letter in my hand and tossed it into the lake. Watching it float away felt like letting go of a part of my past, a part of the battle that had consumed me for so long. I had fought for justice, but now I was choosing something else, something far more important. And as the letter disappeared into the water, I realized that the true victory wasn't in the position, the power, or the control. It was in the peace I had finally found, in the life I could still build, free from the shadows of the past.